My wife's secret meetings in the garden, plus the ruthless revenge she never saw coming. I found a buried box under the roses in our garden. Inside, secret letters, photos, and a handkerchief marked R. Every Friday, a stranger met my wife among the flowers I planted. I stayed silent, moving money, guarding the children, collecting proof. Then the bank exposed her lies, and her world collapsed. My quiet revenge grew like the garden, until she was left with nothing but the key to her ruin. I used to think marriage was a garden you could set on autopilot, plant the vows, water them on holidays, and trust the roots to do the rest. It turns out even the neatest rose can hide a rot if the gardener stops looking. If you've ever woken up and realized your life was blooming without you, stay with me. And if this kind of story hits close to your bone, don't be shy. Leave a thought and stick around, because I need company to tell the whole truth. We'd been married 20 years when I gave Nora the garden. It was my anniversary promise, and my apology rolled into one. Raised cedar beds in a neat L, trellises for climbing roses. A small gate I carved our initials into like teenagers. I teach English at the high school, the kind of man who fixes wobbly desks and edits essays with more mercy than grammar. Nora manages a branch of a bank where money smells like lemon polish and closed doors. Spring came early that year, a soft surprise after a winter that overstayed its welcome. I laid compost like cake layers and pressed seeds into the dark, wondering which of us would keep better promises. Me, the caretaker, or Nora, the one I built a life for. She said she loved it. She said all the right words in the soft voice you use for cocker spaniels and delicate things that might break if you breathe wrong. Nora always promised to tend the beds. After quarter close, she'd say, brushing soil from her skirt without ever bending far enough to get dirty. After the manager's meeting, she'd add, placing seed packets like coasters she'd never use. She brought home garden gloves in the exact shade of her favorite lipstick and left them on the patio table like a still life, intention postponed. So most afternoons, it was me out there with a trowel, while Nora's late shifts piled up like drifted snow. Fine at first, then suddenly high enough to block the road. I talked to the roses because they seemed to answer back. Old men in this town talk to engines. I talk to things that bleed. Our kids, grown, both gone, texted on weekends and came home for laundry and hugs. We were the kind of middle-aged couple that keeps the porch light on and the thermostat 1 degree lower than comfort. The first odd thing was tiny. Under the oldest rose, the one I'd planted from a cutting my mother smuggled in her handbag after my father's funeral, the soil had been disturbed. Not the shallow dig of a raccoon, the careful scoop of human hands. I tell myself I didn't look because I didn't want to be that husband, the one who searches. Truth is, I didn't look because I already knew my life had a new drawer somewhere in it, and I wasn't ready to find the key. Weeks slipped. Nora's late nights turned into late weekends. She started using a perfume I didn't recognize, something expensive, citrus that dried down to smoke, and said a client brought it as part of an appreciation gift. Banks do everything with gift baskets. They don't send perfume with notes that say, "Wear this when you think of me." On a yellow Friday, the kind that belongs in a painting, I finally dug. The soil gave way in a neat square, like a good book that opens flat without breaking its spine. 6 inches down, my trowel hit wood. A small cedar box lay on its side, like it had been listening to the roots for a long time. I brushed dirt away and lifted it out. Inside, a handkerchief embroidered with a letter that wasn't mine, a photograph of Nora at our garden gate, looking 25 again, and 3 folded notes wrapped with twine, like a tiny ceremony. The handkerchief was linen with a single initial stitched in navy. R. The photograph had been taken from our neighbor's yard, angled enough to hide the person holding the camera. The notes were written in a quick, elegant hand I didn't know. Friday, last hour before close. Wear the blue. Your husband's roses smell like old secrets. You make afternoons merciful. It wasn't the words that cut me. It was the handwriting, the calm entitlement of someone who puts a glass down without a coaster on someone else's table. I put the box back and covered it the way you cover a sleeping child, careful, slow, a little guilty. Then I went inside and made tea because that's what my mother taught me to do when tears are coming and dignity would like to be present for them. Nora came home later than late, the perfume walking in ahead of her like it owned the hall. She looked surprised to see me at the kitchen table with the garden gloves in front of me, like evidence I hadn't chosen yet to use. "Long day?" I asked. "VIP portfolio review," she said. "We're rolling out a new preferred client product." She kissed the top of my head without touching my cheeks. "It's a small thing, where a kiss lands. It tells you whether love is visiting or living there." I didn't sleep much. At 3, I stepped onto the lawn and stood at the roses like a man visiting a grave, unsure which words belonged to the living and which to the dead. Saturday morning, I installed a trail camera disguised as a little clay bird in a pot near the gate. The footage saved to a memory card. I justified it to myself 6 ways before breakfast and 7 after church. I told myself the garden was mine to watch. I told myself vows deserve witnesses. The first 5 days, the camera caught squirrels on their petty errands, a cat I didn't recognize licking its paw like it had stolen something good, and the mail carrier cutting across the lawn with a wave. On the 6th, at 5:41 p.m., the lens caught a man standing just inside the gate. Dark suit, no tie, the posture of someone used to people coming to him. He looked past the camera like he could smell it. Nora joined him 3 minutes later. She wore the blue dress she pretends is gray under office lights. They touched like people who've practiced not getting caught, which is a different touch than people who've practiced loving well. They didn't kiss. They stood close enough to make air remember how it used to be occupied. I didn't play the footage twice. I tucked the card in a drawer in my study and went back outside to deadhead the roses like a man adjusting a tie before a verdict. On Monday, I stopped by the bank as a customer, the kind of visit where your loyalty is the product and the lollipop is for the child you don't have with you. Nora was in her office behind glass with a view of the parking lot and a plaque that made her last name look expensive. At her desk sat the man from the garden, signing a document with a pen that looked like a wand. He glanced up when I approached, his expression the polite curiosity of a stranger in your kitchen asking where you keep the salt. "Richard Lane," the receptionist said, beaming. "Our favorite family office. ER. Perfume that wasn't mine. Notes that liked my roses." Nora smiled, small, the way you smile at a dog you're hoping won't bark. "Mr. Lane is upgrading some services," she said, voice warm. "Honey, I'll be home by 7. My name sat between them like a paperweight trying to hold down a hurricane. At school, I graded papers until the ink decided I was done. 17 essays insisted that The Great Gatsby is about old money versus new money. One boy wrote that it's actually about people pretending they haven't already decided who deserves to be happy. I gave him an A and underlined pretending twice. You'd think this is where I confronted her, raised my voice, held up the garden like a crime scene. Instead, I did what quiet men do. I made a plan made of gentleness and knives. I bought a plain composition notebook and labeled it with a dumb joke kids wouldn't touch if they snooped. Mulch schedule. Inside, I logged dates, times, deliveries, the way you log rainfall in a drought. I printed the garden photos and paperclipped them behind the page where no one but me would look. I drove to the hardware store for a second camera and pretended to be irritated about the price, the way men practice being ordinary while their lives go strange. The second camera went behind the arborvitae, catching the angle the clay bird couldn't. From there, my garden told me the rest. They came Fridays mostly, sometimes Wednesdays, when Nora texted dinner with the regional manager and brought home a receipt stamped with a restaurant that doesn't serve anyone after 8. They brought small packages, a book with the dust jacket removed, a bottle of wine with a ribbon that made me want to learn new words for humiliation, the perfume's twin. Twice they brought nothing and stood in the dusk sharing quiet like they'd earned it. I learned the pace of betrayal, not a sprint, not a marathon, interval training, burst, rest, burst, rest. Recovery days included church, where Nora sang "Abide with Me," softly enough to sound like innocence. Every time I watched, a voice inside me measured what I could burn. A louder, older voice told me to plant instead, so I planted. I called a lawyer who smelled like peppermint and victory and asked about trusts for grown children that keep dumb decisions from eating smart savings. I moved modest amounts into accounts with my name on them alone, the way you tuck cash in your shoe before you walk through a neighborhood that used to love you. I updated beneficiaries. I added a clause to the will about the house and who can claim it if irreconcilable differences decide to stop being a euphemism. I did not stop loving her. That is the part people want me to skip. Love is not stupid, it's stubborn. I loved her with the tired ferocity of a man standing between his home and the wind, knowing the fence needs paint and holding it anyway. Then came the twist I didn't expect, the one that made revenge less about rage and more about proof. A woman called my classroom near the end of the day, voice cool, a little too careful. "Mr. Adair," she said, "I'm calling about the Friday garden deliveries." I sat back, eyes on the line of seniors practicing present perfect. "I think you have the wrong number," I said. "You teach my son," she replied. "Jesse Lane. He told me about your roses. He told me you're kind. My husband thinks he's discreet. He's not." I waited. Silences deserve respect. "My name is Rachel," she said. "I'm Richard's wife." R again. Perfume becomes a person if you let it. "I don't know what you want from me," I said. "The truth," she answered. "And to keep blood off the floor when it arrives." We met at a coffee shop where grief goes to drink something hot and appear civilized. Rachel was the kind of composed that looks like art. She set a folder on the table between us, bank statements, emails, a rental agreement for a storage unit under a shell company that's always named after a tree. "Your garden is where he plays romance," she said, not unkind. "The storage unit is where he keeps the paperwork that ruins people." Nora's name wasn't on a single document, but Nora's initials were in more than one memo, CC'd subtly, threaded through like fishing line. "Your wife may have thought she was falling in love," Rachel said, eyes steady. "My husband fell in love with leverage." Leverage. The ugliest, beautiful word in banking. We worked quietly together for a week. Two strangers kneeling on opposite sides of the same graveboard, trying not to touch hands. Rachel had a friend in compliance who didn't love Richard. I had cameras and the kind of patience small towns breed into you. We exchanged what we had. She taught me how to read the bank's innards. I taught her how to name a picture without making it obscene. If you're wondering why I didn't just confront Nora with Rachel by my side, it's because I wanted an ending that didn't require volume. I wanted the garden to do it for me. I wanted consequence to look like gravity. On a Thursday, because everything important in this story keeps happening before Friday, we set the stage. Rachel sent the compliance packet to the bank's internal investigators with a cover note that said nothing and meant everything. I mailed an anonymous envelope to the board of directors, stills from the garden, dates, and one typed sentence on plain paper. "Your brand cannot afford the habits of your leadership." I did not sign it. My name had work to do elsewhere, on the kids' trust, on the mortgage, on the future I planned to be allowed to live. The board called an emergency meeting for Monday. On Sunday, I went to church alone. The sermon was about pruning, what you cut, why you cut it, how a gardener's love looks like harm in the wrong season. I sang "Abide with Me" for both of us. Monday morning, the town smelled like cold rain and hot coffee, the only two things that make us forgive weather. Nora left in her dark suit with the cautious gait of a person crossing a street with ice somewhere under it. I watched from the porch with my mug and the dog, and the certainty that whatever happened now, the garden had already told the truth. By noon, my phone lit with 2 texts. From Lena, my colleague, whose steadiness I'd borrowed more than once this year. Staff whispering, "Your bank is boiling." From an unknown number that turned out to be compliance. "Thank you for the documentation. You saved us months. We will protect your family's privacy." I sat very still. Saved. Protect. Words like those don't live in my house. They visit. Nora came home at 6 with her hair still neat and her face not. She set her keys down, missing the bowl by an inch. "They suspended me," she said. She didn't sob. She folded. "I didn't sign anything," she said. "I was careful. I thought..." Richard said. She stopped when she heard his name in her mouth. "Careful," I repeated. "In my garden." The words weren't loud. They didn't need to be. They wore boots. She stared at me as if a stranger had opened our door and spoken with my voice. "You knew," she whispered. "I planted those roses," I said. "I feel every shovel." Nora slumped into the chair, the one that has our son's pencil scratch on the leg and a wine stain the shape of a sticker heart under the cushion. "I thought he loved me," she said. "I believe you," I answered. "He loves himself near people who make it easy." Tears finally arrived, the quiet kind that clean nothing. "What happens now?" she asked. "Consequence," I said. "And the dishes, both, in that order." When the bank went public, they didn't say her name. This is how institutions apologize to themselves. But our town reads between lines the way I read between paragraphs. Nora was suddenly the only person in the grocery store who didn't need to check prices. No one wanted her to stand near them long enough to reach for a carton. Rachel's husband resigned to pursue opportunities abroad. Abroad is where men go when everyone has learned the word leverage. I did not throw Nora out. Revenge, done right, doesn't require moving trucks. She drifted to the guest room, then to her sister's for 2 weeks, then back again with a face that couldn't choose between fight and surrender. My plan wasn't to replace her with a woman. Replacement had already happened. Ritual for chaos, truth for perfume, a garden bed for a storage unit. But there are people who arrive like weather, not forcing anything, simply fronting steady air. Lena started bringing supper on Thursdays because Thursdays are when life chooses people. She laughed with me at the stove. She listened to me without trying to heal me. Once, she put her hand on my forearm when I dropped a plate and said, "You're allowed to be tired." And I thought, oh, the way you think when a door opens to a room you forgot you built. One evening after a meeting with our lawyer, trusts signed, the house secured with clauses gentler than locks, I found Nora in the garden, hands empty. The cedar box lay by her feet. She dug it up without disturbing the roots, which is something a person who doesn't tend still knows how to do, apparently. She used to judge me for not baking pies, she said, and it took me a second to realize she meant my mother, dead 10 springs now. She judged you for not loving anything you couldn't buy, I said. Nora looked up, startled at the accuracy. "I loved you," she said. "Yes," I answered. "The way a banker loves a building." She held out the notes. "They weren't all from him," she said. "One was mine, the one about mercy." I already knew. A teacher knows his wife's handwriting, even when shame strangled it narrower. I wanted to feel. She shook her head. "It doesn't matter." "It matters," I said. "It just doesn't excuse." We buried the box again, not to hide it. To mark the place where a kind of tree we didn't need had tried to grow. The bank reached a settlement. Nora kept her freedom and lost her job. Rachel filed for divorce with the efficiency of a woman who has finally remembered she's the weather. Her son stayed in my class through May and wrote an essay about Macbeth that made me think he'd do fine. He understood the difference between ambition and hunger. On the last day of school, I brought home a stack of yearbooks and set them on the patio table. The roses were loud with June. The clay bird camera was long gone. You don't look after you've seen. Nora stepped outside, holding a small brass key. She set it on the table between the yearbooks and the bowl of peaches like a ritual. "This was for the storage unit," she said. "I don't need it," I told her. "No," she said, voice small. "I do. Sometimes the only way to finish a story is to leave a door open on purpose. We didn't divorce. We didn't reconcile. We learned how to be two people who once built a life and now maintain it separately under the same roof while we teach it how to move in both directions. On Sundays, I sit beside her in church because the pew remembers us that way, and sometimes furniture deserves mercy. On Thursdays, Lena brings supper, and we eat at the table that has become more honest than beautiful. On Fridays, no one waits at the garden gate. The roses still bloom because roses don't care about human paperwork. If you were me, would you have burned the garden down? Would you have dug up every root that ever touched those letters? Or would you have done what I did? Let consequence do its slow, patient work and replace lies with presence until truth took up the space it deserved. Tell me, stories like this breathe better when you lend them your lungs. And if you want more of these quiet, messy autopsies of love and loyalty, pull up a chair here, like, subscribe, and leave the line you'd have said at the gate. Some nights, I still step outside to listen to the yard. The gate creaks exactly the way it always has. A breeze moves the roses enough to make them nod like old women at good news. On the far bed, I planted herbs, basil, thyme, mint, that will take over if I let it. Nora stands sometimes on the back steps with her tea and nods at the scent like she's considering learning their names. We don't say much. Language earned back slowly tends to be honest. When she turns to go inside, I point to the tiny shoots coming up between the stones, the kind you'd consider weeds if you were in a hurry. Volunteers, I say. They choose to grow where we didn't plan. She nods. "I know," she says, almost smiling. "I was one." The morning after I buried the cedar box again, I couldn't look at the roses without hearing whispers. They rustled when there was no breeze, bowed under weight that wasn't weather, and held a color that felt newly dishonest. I told myself it was imagination, but imagination doesn't leave bruises. Nora poured her coffee, scrolling through emails like they were scripture. "Busy week?" I asked. "Always," she said, eyes on the screen, thumb flicking like a metronome for other people's money. Her hand trembled once on the handle. Small, almost tender, as if her body was apologizing for what her mouth wouldn't say. She left in the navy suit I bought on a birthday when we were still arguing about travel pillows and playlists, not lawyers and codes. The zipper sang its practiced note. I stood in the doorway with the dog and wondered if he knew the sound of it now, too. Some betrayals are auditory. At school, I couldn't read a single essay. Words swam. Students asked about symbolism in Of Mice and Men, and I almost laughed out loud. Symbolism. My life was bleeding metaphors. Garden, box, an embroidered initial that didn't belong to me. That night, after Nora texted VIP dinner, "Don't wait up," I went back outside with a flashlight and a resolve I hated. The box had new contents, a Polaroid of them in my garden, her head tilted in a laugh I hadn't been able to find for years. Pinned beneath it, a note. "Next Friday, same time, don't let the roses miss us." I didn't rebury those pieces of paper in the dark. I took them inside and slid them into a black folder where paper becomes testimony. Then I whispered the rule I would keep no matter how the world begged otherwise. No shouting, no violence, no mess the children have to mop. Revenge, if it was coming, would move like the soil, quiet, patient, inevitable. The plan started in whispers too. I visited the bank not as a husband, but as a customer who had decided prudence was a hobby. I opened a savings account in only my name, changed beneficiaries where I lawfully could, and shifted funds in amounts too modest to alarm, but too regular to ignore. Every click of the keyboard felt like driving a nail into a coffin I refused to decorate with flowers. Next came the house. At the county clerk's office, a woman in a cardigan older than our marriage explained survivorship and contingencies as if she were teaching me to fold napkins. I asked small questions with large consequences and left knowing that ours could, in a pinch, become mine and the children's, without drama, only signatures. Paperwork is the kind of mercy that doesn't need forgiveness. I did not stop loving Nora. People will want to skip that line, but it's the hinge. Everything swings on. Love is not stupid, it's stubborn. I loved her like a man holding a fence in a wind he didn't order, bracing his feet because that's what feet are for. And then, Lena. She wasn't supposed to be in this story. We'd worked together years ago, the kind of colleagues who know each other's coffee orders and the names of the dogs we buried. We met by accident in the fluorescent aisle of a grocery store, both of us reaching for soup our bodies didn't need. "Adam," she said, careful, like my name might be chipped porcelain. "How are you?" I said the truth you can say to almost anyone. "Tired." She nodded. "Then you're still honest." We shared a coffee that turned into a conversation that turned into a ritual. No romance, no auditions. Just a woman with the kind of steadiness you can lean your back on without knocking anything over. She started helping with set construction for the winter play at school. The fake street lamps, the cardboard porches, the illusion of neighborhoods where everyone knows your name and no one steals your mail. The kids took to her immediately, which is another way of saying she spoke fluent child without condescension. Nora noticed. "How's Lena?" she asked one Tuesday, like a person testing a floorboard. "Steady," I said. "She's divorced," Nora added. "She is," I agreed. "Do you think that's wise?" "I think truth is wise," I said, and washed the coffee mug slowly enough to be understood. Friday came like clockwork teaches it to, so did Richard. From the Arbor Vitae camera, I watched their bodies calibrate, close, then cautious, then closer again, as if distance were a chore. They didn't kiss, they never kissed in the garden. They handled proximity like a priceless vase, display without fingerprints. I printed every still with the clinical compassion of a nurse changing a dressing. Saturday morning, the printer coughed up its last page, and I slid it into an envelope with no return address. Compliance at the bank got one. The board of directors got another. Richard's wife, Rachel, received the full set plus the note I copied from the garden box. "Don't let the roses miss us." I didn't sign my name. Names are for things you want back. For a week, the town performed normal. Nora left early, came home late, kissed my forehead like she was clocking out. Richard drove through downtown with the windows up. But underneath the asphalt, tremors. A teller whispered to another teller. A branch manager closed a door and didn't reopen it when someone knocked. My phone stayed quiet, except for one message from an unknown number. "Thank you. He won't know it came from you." Rachel, I assumed. Mercy, I hoped. During those 7 days, I added weight to the other end of my life. I showed up at school early enough to make coffee for the custodian and late enough to drive 2 students home who otherwise would have walked with backpacks heavier than their spines. I made dinner without asking whose turn it was. I learned to braid the neighbor's little girl's hair because her mother works nights and her father pretends Pinterest is a foreign country. Replacement is an accumulation, not an event. Then came the knock I'd have recognized even if I were a continent away. Nora stood in the doorway, pale in a way that made lipstick cruel. "They called me in," she said. Her purse hung from her shoulder like it had lost interest. "The board, compliance. Someone sent them. Pictures, notes." Her mouth turned into a straight, white wound. Anonymous. I didn't say yes, and I didn't say no. I folded the newspaper and set it aside, like the day was a chapter we weren't reading anymore. She reached for my arm and didn't find it where she remembered. "It could cost me my career," she whispered. "You already spent it," I said quietly. "You're just seeing the receipt." She slept on the edge of the bed that night, the way people sleep on trains, ready to stand as soon as their stop arrives. I wrote in a composition notebook, labeled with a joke kids wouldn't touch if they snooped. Mulch schedule, dates, times, memos. In the margins, where the paper forgives ink, I wrote a sentence I needed as a spine. No shouting, no violence, no mess the children have to mop. Monday, the bank announced an internal review with language so careful it squeaked. By Wednesday, Nora was on leave. By Friday, Richard was abroad. Abroad is where men go when the town learns to pronounce leverage. Lena brought stew that could feed survivors. We ate at the table like people who believed in forks. The kids told her about the play, about the way Mrs. Chan can clap with just 2 fingers, about the science fair volcano that actually spit. Nora watched from the hall a moment too long to call it accidental. "You're replacing me," she said later, not crying. "You replaced yourself," I answered, and slept without dreaming of stairs. The next morning I found the cedar box sitting on the patio table, earth still clinging to its corners like accusation. Nora had dug it up, or Richard had asked her to, or guilt had finally discovered that seeds sprout. Inside, the handkerchief embroidered with R, the Polaroids curled like ashamed leaves, and a 4th note I hadn't seen. "There are rooms in your life you haven't unlocked yet." I closed the lid gently, set it aside, and made French toast for the children with extra cinnamon, because forgiveness tastes like something if you let it. Rachel called that afternoon from a number my phone learned to accept. "He's trying to pivot," she said. "Tell me you kept the originals." "I keep everything I'm willing to carry," I said. She exhaled a small laugh. "You sound like a good teacher." "I'm trying to be a good gardener." "Same thing," she said, and hung up after promising paperwork that would prefer to be quiet. Nora went to her sister's the following week, leaving a note on the counter that said she needed space to think. Space is what you ask for when you're afraid of gravity. I let her go. The house breathed in a way it hadn't in months. I replaced light bulbs. I oiled the hinge on the gate. I fixed the loose board on the back steps that had tripped strangers and family with equal arrogance. Maintenance is a love language too. With Nora gone, the garden settled into the middle season rhythm I love. The part where everything looks mild and is secretly violent with growth. I planted basil where the box had been, half as a benediction and half as a dare. When I watered, the soil released a sweetness that felt like the opposite of perfume. Our daughter visited and asked for cuttings to take to her dorm window. I showed her how to snip at an angle and let the stems drink. She said, "You make it look easy." And I said, "Nothing about this is," and kissed the part in her hair like it was holy. Lena and I took evening walks that ended at the river. We didn't talk about Nora unless I started it. We talked about lesson plans and how children invent grammar when adults stop listening, and whether grief throws its voice or we just hear it everywhere. One night she said, "You're carrying a lot and calling it a backpack." I said, "Is it showing?" "Only when you put it down," she replied, and my chest remembered what air is for. The bank's review went from whispered to public, like storm clouds deciding. They didn't name Nora, but our town reads between lines the way my students read the meme page. Fluently, unfairly, fast. Her friends went silent with the politeness of people waiting to see which way money will walk. Rachel filed for divorce with a grace that made me want to applaud in a courtroom I hoped never to visit. Richard sold his lake house to a man who likes to boat in confidence. Then, one late afternoon, Nora returned with a suitcase and the kind of posture pain rehearses. She set the brass key from the storage unit on the kitchen table between the bowl of peaches and the mail. "Here," she said. "I don't want it." "I don't need it," I answered. She swallowed. "I do." She slid it back toward herself, like a person learning where ownership ends. We spoke carefully, like people holding a glass table they can't put down. "I didn't sign anything," she said. "I kept my hands clean." Your hands weren't the part that needed washing, I said, surprising both of us. Her eyes watered, and she nodded in that slow way grief nods when it has heard this sermon before. That night, she slept in the guest room. In the morning, I found the cedar box on the kitchen counter, open, empty, like a mouth that had finally finished confessing. A note lay beside it in her handwriting. "I'm sorry I used your garden to grow my loneliness." I slid the note into the black folder and left the box on the porch to weather. Some things you keep, some you let the sun explain. Summer gathered itself. Our son came home with laundry and a grin and asked if Lena could come to his pickup game because she cheers like a real person. She did. Nora joined us on the other sideline, clapping at polite intervals like a visiting dignitary. When our boy hit the winning shot by accident, a banked miracle, he turned to look for me first. His eyes found Lena and me together, his smile widening, a small relief crossing his face like wind. Children choose with their bodies before their words know how. After the game, Nora approached with a caution that made the grass look dangerous. "You look happy," she said to our son. "I am," he told her. "It feels lighter." She nodded like a woman practicing acceptance, and for the first time, I saw the outline of someone who might someday tell the truth without asking to be admired for it. That evening, the four of us ate pasta at the patio table. The roses leaned in like sympathetic aunts. Lena told a story about a student who turned a detention essay into a poem good enough to make a vice principal reconsider his worldview. Nora listened. She didn't reach for my hand. She didn't reach for the past. She asked for more parmesan and said thank you, and I believed her. When the plates were cleared, she stood and touched the back of her chair like it had a pulse. "I'm meeting with the bank tomorrow," she said. "Final meeting." "Good," I answered, not unkind. She hesitated. "Do you want me to move out after?" "I want you to move toward honesty," I said, "wherever that is." She nodded, eyes fixed on the little clay bird in the pot, unaware of its history, and went inside. I stayed outside until the porch light decided it had done enough work. The basil near the box's old resting place breathed out that clean, bossy smell only basil has. I thought about the first day of our marriage and the last day we were good, realizing they weren't the same date. Then I wrote in my notebook, "Mercy is not a door. It's a light you can carry down any hallway." 2 days later, a letter arrived from the bank addressed to Mr. and Mrs. Adair, and for once the conjunction didn't scold. It thanked us for our cooperation, confirmed Nora's separation from the institution, and assured us that no criminal charges would be recommended at this time. Consequence with edges sanded. I read it twice and set it under a magnet shaped like a tomato. Nora stood next to me longer than mail requires. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," she said. "Good," I answered. "I'm not ready to manufacture any." She exhaled, relief and grief braided. "Thank you for not letting me pretend I deserve it yet." That was the truest sentence I'd heard from her in a year. It didn't fix our house, but it plumbed it. In the weeks that followed, the garden forgot how to be an accomplice and remembered how to be a garden. I taught Lena how to prune without killing. She taught me how to accept a compliment without turning it into a joke. Nora watered once, carefully, like a tourist. She set the hose down and said, "I don't know the names of any of these," and I shrugged. "They don't know mine either. We get along." We almost laughed. Almost is sometimes enough. On a quiet Sunday, the four of us built a trellis from cedar strips and stubbornness. The kids measured. Lena held. Nora steadied a beam, while I drove the last screw. When we stepped back, the structure looked clean and unafraid. I thought, this is what replacement really means. New wood, where rot had lived. Not to erase the past, but to give the future something honest to climb. I didn't say it out loud. Some truths work better when they root in silence first. The morning the bank called Nora in for the final conversation, the house stood very still, like it was trying to keep the picture frames from rattling. She came down dressed in black, no jewelry, no lipstick, holding a folder too thin to help. The dog watched her like you watch thunder, ready to count. "Do you want me there?" I asked. She shook her head. "I don't want anyone to see you and think..." "Think what?" "That I'm the kind of woman who still deserves a witness." I didn't argue. She put the brass key in my palm, a reflex now, like we were trading a relic back and forth, so neither of us had to carry it long. When the door closed, the air forgot how to move for a few seconds. I opened the back door to show it the garden, and it remembered. I did ordinary things until they felt like prayer. Rinsed bowls, wiped a counter, watered basil that healed faster than people do. At 11, the phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number, one I now recognized as bank compliance. "This will be formalized in writing. Thank you for your earlier materials. We found more." A second text arrived before I could type a reply. "Protect your children from headlines today. We're issuing a statement." When the call finally came from Nora, it wasn't words first, it was breath that had run laps inside a chest. "It's done," she said. "Separation, no charges. If I cooperate in the internal case, I signed. I don't..." Her voice broke on a word and didn't pick it up again. "Come home," I told her. "Do you want me to? I want you not to be alone with this." She was at the door 20 minutes later, the folder still thin, the mouth a line. I made tea. She held it and didn't drink. "Their statement hits at 2, she said. "The town will translate by 2:05. Then we have 5 minutes to be people," I said. "After that, we become stories." She almost smiled. "Adam?" "Yes." "Did you send the photos?" I thought about the camera hidden in the clay bird, the envelopes, Rachel's steady voice on a phone that learned me. "I sent what the future needed," I said. She nodded like a student who has finally understood why the teacher cared about the boring part. "I hate him," she said suddenly, the words small and shocked, like she'd swallowed a glass marble and finally felt it. "You're allowed," I said. "Hate isn't the opposite of love. Forgetting is. And we aren't forgetting today." At 2, the bank statement arrived on the town's news site with all the careful language institutions use when they're talking to mirrors. Internal review, improper relationships, vendor privileges revoked, leadership failures, resignations, no names, all fingerprints. By 2:07, Mrs. Chan from school texted me, "If you need me to run copies or take an afternoon duty, I'm yours." By 2:10, Rachel sent a single message. "He is on a plane. Tell your children the storm will pass. I'll weather mine." By 2:12, my sister wrote, "I'm proud of you for not burning down the garden." By 2:15, the doorbell rang. It was the pastor, retired, the one who married us and then kept marrying us in the hallway after fights by asking if we wanted to be kind or right. He held a casserole covered in foil and looked at my face the way old carpenters look at a stud wall. "I don't know what to say," he admitted. "You don't have to," I said. "Just put the food on the counter where grief can find it." Nora stayed upstairs after that. Some grief prefers altitude. I took a walk to move the day through my legs. At the grocery store, 2 women in the produce aisle lowered their voices without lowering them enough. At the hardware store, the kid who always tries to upsell me on special screws handed me a bag of cedar shims and said, "On the house, Mr. A," then looked like he wished the house could fix itself. In the parking lot, the wind picked up. I leaned into it and thought of triangles. When I got home, Lena's car was at the curb. She was seated on the porch steps with a bag of groceries and the ability to look at a man without making him pick a script. "Everyone at school is pretending to ignore the news," she said. "That's our version of kindness." "Thank them for me," I said. "I will," she replied. "And I'll thank you for not pretending with me." In the kitchen, she unpacked without asking. Eggs, spinach, oranges. Food that tells your body it's still invited, she said. We cooked in the kind of silence that makes every sound honest. Knife on board, onion in pan, water deciding to boil. Halfway through chopping, I felt the urge to say something to the invisible room that listens to stories like ours, the one you're in right now. If you're still with me, I'm grateful. People drift off at this point. The scandal headline has cooled, the moral feels earned too early. But this is where decision lives, not the shouting parts. If you've ever stood at the sink with a life you didn't order cooling on your counter, hit the little heart and leave me a line about the thing you would have cooked instead. I keep every word. Some nights it's the only heat I've got. We ate at the table. Nora came down halfway through, wearing a sweater that used to be Sunday and now looked like Tuesday after a storm. She ate quietly, said thank you to Lena without wobbling the air, and kept her eyes on her plate in the way people do when they don't trust the room to hold their pupils. Final meeting went. Human, she said. Good, I answered. Rachel was there, she added, surprising me. Not in the room with me, in the building. I saw her leave. She looked undestroyed. That's one of her hobbies, I said. I'm jealous, Nora whispered. I am too, I admitted. After dinner, I washed. Lena dried. Nora wiped the table until wood stopped needing it. The world outside kept doing weather. Inside, we built something like a truce out of tasks. That night I sat on the back steps with a sweater and the dog and the sense that something had finally decided where it was going. The basil breathed, sweet and bossy. Above the fence, the neighbor's porch light flicked on, then off. A kid somewhere practiced trumpet with the courage of the unlistened to. Nora opened the door and stepped out, barefoot. "Can I sit?" she asked. I nodded. We watched nothing happen for a while, which is an underappreciated skill. I told them everything, she said, voice a kept promise. Not just what they suspected, the parts they didn't know to ask. That's brave, I said. It's late, she said. It always is, I answered. She folded her hands in her lap, fingers learning each other again. I kept thinking, she said slowly, how you planted all this for me, and I used it like a mailbox. I didn't rescue her with a joke. She kept going. I thought I was starved. I was just bored. Bored is not hunger. I know that now. We let that sit between us the way you let bread rise. I don't know how to be here, she said finally. Neither do I said. But the house knows. The garden knows. We can follow their rules until we remember ours. We went inside and slept in separate rooms, which felt less like exile and more like giving the night space to do its work. The next week, the bank's lawyers finished speaking the language of distance. Rachel filed her papers cleanly, her signature steady all the way through the S of Lane. Richard's name slid down the news cycle like a magnet down a refrigerator, visible until it wasn't. The town moved on to a new rumor about the high school football coach's truck, which is how towns spit out pride when they get tired of chewing shame. I kept teaching. Seniors rehearsed speeches about why a line from King Lear belongs in modern politics. Freshmen learned how to put a topic sentence on its feet and send it to school. Some afternoons I'd see Rachel's boy, Jesse, miss a step on the stairs and catch himself, then look my way like someone who knows the difference between falling and learning how not to. Lena remained weather, present, unarguable, kind. She didn't reach for my hand, and I didn't reach for hers, not because we were saintly, but because some bridges deserve to be built slow enough to impress a river. We took the long way home from the grocery store on purpose and let the dog choose the route when our resolve got cute. Nora looked for work and found, "We'll keep your resume on file," a dozen times. She volunteered at the library to shelve returns and say, "Welcome to the only door in town that still thinks it's a hug." On Wednesdays, she baked muffins bad enough to make us laugh. On Thursdays, she watered the far bed and said the names of herbs out loud, like she was taking attendance for the first time. One bright afternoon, the doorbell rang. I opened it, half expecting a neighbor with a question about trash day. Instead, a courier handed me a small, battered parcel with no return address. Inside, the cedar box, weathered now, its corners soft. No notes, no photographs, no handkerchief, just the box, emptied by rain and time and the kind of remembering that lets go. Nora turned it in her hands, then set it on the table like a relic we didn't have to worship anymore. "Keep it?" I asked. "Let it go gray," she said. "Maybe it can hold napkins." That evening, she stood at the sink with the brass key and said, "I went to the storage unit today." I waited. "It's empty," she said. "He cleared it before he fled, or someone cleared it for him. Either way, there's nothing left there for me to be ashamed of." "Shame doesn't need furniture," I said gently. "I know," she answered, "but it needs somewhere to sit. I'd rather it take the porch and not my chest." We laughed, small and real. By late summer, the roses had the floppy generosity of things that have lived through a winter of neglect and decided to try again. The basil kept offering. Mint took the corner like a rumor, thick, impossible, joyous. We built a second trellis with the kids one Saturday. Lena sanded the cross pieces with the capable hands of someone who respects splinters. When we were done, Nora stepped back, shading her eyes. "That's clean work," she said softly, an old line, new again. "Thank you," I said, and meant it. The children kept coming home and then leaving again, the way they do when their lives have learned to walk. Our son knocked on a Sunday evening with laundry and a grin and a question for me about compound sentences. Our daughter texted a photo of a basil sprig thriving in a chipped mug captioned, "Look, Dad volunteers." I typed back, "Proud of you for recognizing what chose you." One night, on the back steps, Lena asked, "Do you want to try a date that isn't a crisis?" I felt the porch beneath us, solid, honest, recently repaired, and said, "Yes, but slow." "Slow is the only way I know," she said. We let the decision sit with us like another chair. At church, the pastor preached on Jonah, about people who keep running from small obediences and then call the whale God's fault. Nora squeezed the hymnal in her hands and sang 2 notes louder than usual. Afterward, in the parking lot, Mrs. Chan hugged her like someone who doesn't care who's watching. Nora cried in a way the sky approved of, and no one pretended not to see. Autumn comes like an apology we're ready to accept. The leaves practiced leaving, the town practiced letting them. I cleared the beds, not all the way, because I've learned plants enjoy a little memory to hold the frost off. Nora asked if the basil could keep a few cousins inside for winter. "Of course," I said, and handed her the snips. And that night, she stood in the kitchen with a handful of green and said, "I'm not a good person in this story. You're the person who finally stopped lying." I said, "Does that count? It weighs more than you think." She nodded and tucked basil into a jar of water like she was giving it a room of its own. We didn't sign divorce papers. We didn't stage a reconciliation for the neighbors. Some days we were kind. Some days we were correct. Some days we accomplished the impossible feat of being both at once. On Thursdays, Lena still brought too much supper, and I still accepted it like a man who knows generosity usually comes with leftovers. On Fridays, this was my private ritual, I still walked to the garden at dusk and counted the minutes between the light and the dark, just to prove to my body that time was, in fact, moving. You might be waiting for a final blow, a dramatic porch-front confession, a suitcase, a kiss that either rewrites or erases. But here's what actually happened on the day I guess you'll call the ending, though I experience it as a hinge. It was cold enough to see our voices. Nora asked if I wanted to take one last clipping before frost. We stepped out with mugs and scissors. The dog did his inspection, deciding which parts of the yard he trusted today. Nora reached for the cedar box out of habit, then laughed softly and set her hand down on the empty table. "I bought something," she said, and pulled a small envelope from her sweater. "Please don't be perfume," I said, and she smiled in spite of herself. Inside was a plain, engraved tag on a slender little stake, the kind gardeners use when they're done guessing. It read, "Basil, Ocimum basilicum." Below it, in smaller letters, "Patience." She held it out to me. "For the bed we ruined and replanted," she said, "for your word, and for mine." I pushed the tag into the soil by the new basil we'd promised a week more of living. We stood. We breathed. We watched nothing happen, and knew better than to call it nothing. "Adam," Nora said into the cold, "yes. If you choose to go on a date with Lena, I won't sabotage it." "That's a low bar," I answered. "I know," she said, "but I wanted to clear it." I nodded. "Thank you." She went back inside. I stayed because the last thing I needed to do was as small as it was necessary. From my pocket, I took the brass key, warm from my palm, and set it on the garden table. Not hidden, not returned with ceremony, just placed. Some locks open in more than one direction. Some doors swing only once. What I know now is that you can set a key down and still be the person who decides which rooms belong to you. If you were standing beside me, I'd ask, would you pick up that key? Would you throw it away? Would you bury it where the basil grows wild and call it fertilizer? Tell me. I read the comments at midnight when the house sleeps and the garden rustles with things that made it through. And if you want more of these quiet, stubborn stories, love held up to light until it stops lying, stay. Tap the bell that tells my porch when to turn on. Share this with the friend who watered your houseplant while you were learning to breathe. I'll keep the chairs out here. You keep me honest. The dog nosed my knee and the key slid an inch, chiming the way small metal does when it remembers it's not a burden, just a shape. I left it where it was. Then I went inside, turned off the porch light, and let the garden be dark without being alone.